Olá pessoal, a gente está ao vivo aqui no ITS com uma turma aqui barra pesada para receber o professor Erick Coser, que está no Brasil. Ele, para quem não conhece, é o autor desse livro brilhante a respeito da questão relativa à tecnologia na China, um ensaio sobre a cosmotécnica. Aliás, a obra dele vai ser publicada no Brasil pela editora UBO. I'm saying that your work is going to be published here by the UBO Publishing House. E professor Erick, só fazendo uma breve introdução, depois a gente vai fazer uma apresentação rápida de quem está aqui na mesa. Ele é, na minha opinião, o maior pensador sobre filosofia da tecnologia do planeta. O professor Erick, ele tem uma visão da tecnologia que, na minha opinião, é muito construtiva e que se contrapõe muito a uma visão que tomou raízes no Ocidente a respeito de uma espécie de nós sermos derrotados pela tecnologia, né? Tem uma visão de derrota. Se a gente lê, por exemplo, o Danny Hillis, ou a gente vê o Ray Kurzweil falando de singularidade, isso são ideias que, na minha visão, são empobrecedoras do papel da tecnologia, quase que uma derrota propriamente dita, em que o ser humano ficaria em segundo plano, né? A tecnologia assumiria o primeiro plano e não nos restaria muita coisa mais do que aceitar essa preponderância tecnológica. E o professor Roy, ele fala de forma diferente. Eu acho que ele ousou pensar a tecnologia como parte do cosmos, né? A tecnologia não vai fazer desaparecer o fato de que a gente está num universo gigantesco, de que existem forças políticas, existem forças, de todas as naturezas, os demônios, né? Que os chineses gostam de pensar como tendo interferência nas nossas vidas, não vão desaparecer por causa da tecnologia. Então, ele elimina um pouco esse determinismo e por isso é um prazer ter ele aqui no ITS. I'm going to ask everyone to do I just did a short introduction for you. I will ask everyone here just to say their names and short qualification, because we are going to have a very great conversation. You'll be having some time to deliver your talk, but then our idea, I think, should be more like to have a conversation, and I think that would be great. So let's start.
Eu sou a Beatriz, eu sou mestre em comunicação pela UF e sou pesquisadora aqui do ITS Rio.
Eu sou Ana Luisa, eu sou bacharel em design pela PUC Rio e sou designer e pesquisadora aqui no ITS.
Carlos Dowling, sou professor de cinema e audiovisual da UFPB e doutorando da Escola de Comunicação da UFRJ.
If you want to say...
My name is Erick Coser, and thank you very much for hosting this discussion.
Very good. Thanks a lot.
Eduardo Cavaliere, estou aqui atrás. Sou graduado em Direito, concentração em Matemática Aplicada, trabalho com tecnologia e investimentos.
Sou Erick Coser, sou formado em Administração pela FGV de São Paulo e mestre pela Tsinghua University da China, no Sushiminchi Yuan.
Sou Otávio Miranda, formado pela Renmin University of China, cientista político por formação e empreendedor por vocação.
Boa. And these guys here, just to make sure, we all went to China together this year. We produced a documentary there. We've been doing a lot of projects in China. Might be back there in October for another month. So this is the China crew that are surrounding you around here. So with all that, let me give the floor to you for some initial remarks, and then I think we can move into a conversation.
Right. But I thought that you maybe want to raise some questions, or
we can do that.
Yeah.
Anna, why don't you start?
Reading your work, I had to struggle a little bit to understand some of the concepts you were introducing. I think it's extremely important that you face these issues with technology that we are seeing by trying to develop your own new concepts of dealing with these issues. So I think the two main concepts, and which you're talking also about in your book, are cosmotechnics and techno-diversity. Would you like to describe and give a concise definition of these concepts for us?
Right, so it's a very good question, very good to start with this. Actually, these two concepts are closely related, but I think I develop further, or I frame it as cosmodiversity later than cosmotechnics, and as you see from this book on China, that an essay in cosmotechnics is a term that I developed in order to show that the way we understand technology in the past, we can say in the 20th century, was very much limited to a particular understanding. And this is, of course, if we say, when we talk about technology, we tend to think that technology is universal. And because, let's say paper making, every civilization has paper making. For example, metallurgy, every civilization has metallurgy. So from the understanding of history, from the understanding of anthropology, and from the understanding of the 20th century philosophy of technology, we tend to think that technology is universal. Let's give you an example, like in anthropology of technology, we tend to say that technology is the externalization of memory. For example, you are writing, so you are putting your memory on the paper. It's the same, with when the ancients did cave painting. They externalize their imagination, they externalize their memory, so that it can be passed from generation to the other generation. At the same time, technology is also a liberation of our organs. What does it mean by that? If after we invented, for example, stone knives, then we don't need to use our finger to tear things. We liberate our fingers, for example. So from this perspective, we can say that technology is universal. But on the other hand, we must also understand that technology, there are other dimensions we have to consider, and that which I call the antinomy of the universality of technologies. On the one hand, technology is universal, but on the other hand, we must see that technology is also motivated and limited by certain cosmologies. So technology actually has its locality. And that's the reason for which I call cosmotechnics. And it has a universal dimension, but it also has a non-universal dimension. That is why I call it an antinomy. Now, when I was developing this concept of cosmotechnics, I give it a very preliminary definition: the unification of the cosmic order and the moral order through technical activities. So this is the way to understand that the technological activity is not a mere rationality. Actually, it is something that inscribes certain understanding of the cosmos and the morals. But of course, if we look deeper and closer in different civilizations and cultures, the definition of the cosmos, the definition of the morals, and also the dynamic of these relations are different from one another. Therefore, the question is that if we approach technology in this perspective, can we actually open up a multiplicity of cosmotechnics? And if we are able to open this up, can we have a different understanding when we look at the technology that we have now? Can we even give it a new direction, a new framework, instead of following a technological determinism or technological or technocentrism? So this is the motivation of developing this concept of cosmotechnics. Now, I think that today we are talking about global warming, Anthropocene, and so on, and especially in anthropology here in Brazil, we don't know the respectable anthropologist Eduardo Cavaliere is one of the main anthropologists in what is called ontological turn, the movement. But basically, the ontological turn proposed that the epistemology, which we accept without questioning, is basically based on a kind of naturalism. Naturalism means opposition between culture and nature. And this is the product of European modernity, which we took through the process of colonization, modernization. And what the anthropologists wanted to propose is that instead of naturalism, but there have been different concepts, understandings of nature. So, for example, Platonism, analogism, animism, and here in Brazil there is also perspectivism, the Amerindian ontology. So this is the idea of Professor Viveiros de Castro. Now I wanted to interrogate with them by pushing the agenda a little bit further, by asking if we have different concepts of nature, didn't we also have different concepts of technology? If there was a multiple nature, were there not also multiple techniques? That's why I call it multiple cosmotechnics. And I think that my problem with this return or this going back to nature is that it often has the tendency to ignore the question of technology. So instead of going back to nature, because nature is a very complicated and problematic concept, and if we think from the perspective of techno-diversity, we will be able to rethink about our imagination of technology, our understanding of technology, and also the possible developments. So with techno-diversity, will be a way for us to overcome what was called by the anthropologists European modernity. So at large, this is also a response to the project of decolonization. And as I said yesterday, that is also a response to what I wanted to call a post-European philosophy or post-European thinking. And I'm afraid that this can only be done from the perspective of technology, because we cannot avoid technology today. But we cannot accept what it is now. We have to transform them. We have also to develop alternatives, like what you are doing here.
I understand what you said, but I think in one of your interviews for the magazine Efflux, you talk about the condition we have as colonized countries and how technology, the race for technology for developing AI and machine learning right now could be what was the proper words in the past. But our condition as colonized countries to have to understand the world through the lens of European modernity. Yeah. How are we going to catch up with Europe, since they established the standards, and just like Brazil and China, yeah, we feel like we're always a step behind them. We see that Russia and even North America are developing AI with a certain capacity that we wouldn't be able, right, because we are developing countries. How do we see that we can catch up with that?
I mean, this is also what is interesting in your interest of China. Mm-hmm. So one example that I mean, I know a little bit more about China because I'm Chinese, and that is why I use China as one example to show that what could be otherwise. China was defeated in the two Opium Wars by the English, by the British. And then China was forced to open its doors. And that was the beginning of modernization in China, because before the Chinese, there was a lot of communication between China and Europe, but the Chinese tends to refuse these technologies, to refuse their knowledge, because China already have a system of knowledge in agriculture, in trading, in philosophy, so on and so forth. But it was only after the two open wars that China has to think how to catch up. If you cannot defend yourself, then you have to keep on opening the doors. You have to keep on exporting or selling your resources with a very cheap price, because so there is a competition, there is a difference. There was a difference which maybe we were called a technological difference. Like the level of the development of technology was very different in Europe than in China. There was even no machine guns, for example. So China had to catch up, for example, in the past 150 years. And of course, in between there were many catastrophes in the history of China, of modern China. And now what is happening is that China seems to be one of the or a country that has the fastest development of artificial intelligence. So not only maybe not in terms of research, but in terms of application, like the use of robotics in the airport, the use of robotics in supermarket, and so on and so forth. So this is, what the China has. Maybe we can say today that China has succeeded in catching up the West, and at that time there were Britain and the USA. But then what is next? The geopolitical problem that we have today is that, as you said, we all have to catch up. We all have to compete. Who will be the most developed, most advanced in terms of artificial intelligence? China wants to be the leading country of AI before 2030. And as I said yesterday, that Putin also wanted Russia to be, advanced country in AI, because after China released the white paper in August 2017, Putin on the 1st of September 2017 also said to Russian children that whoever leads in AI will dominate the world. So basically, the geopolitics that we are seeing, that we are witnessing today, is that we are all competing towards competing in terms of a certain technology. And my question is that, well, what if we are able to appropriate this technology, but at the same time we open a new agenda, which is to say a techno diversity? We allow us to rethink or to see an opening of future. Like we can start imagining different use of technology, different forms of technology, different future of technological development. Now this is my hypothesis, and I think that for me, I am convinced that this is possible. But this has to be a collective project, because this question of technology, for example, in philosophy, is one of the least reflected question. Meaning that technology has never become a philosophical question, for even in European philosophy, not until the 20th century. But it seems that now it is a moment for us to think about this question, that we are relatively in a peaceful situation, where probably not the case here in Brazil, but maybe it is the moment for us to think how to appropriate these modern technologies, but while instead of converging towards this homogeneous competition, which is economical, social, political, technological, can we kind of produce a divergence, or what I call a fermentation?
Yes.
So this is why I insist that instead of continuing a discourse on nature, that for us to advance, for us to move forward, that we also need techno diversity.
One comment is this resonates really strongly with the history of technological thinking in Brazil, because especially in the late 90s and in the 2000s, like early 2000s, but also later 2000s, there was a clear view that Brazil had an original thinking about technology. So we would talk about gambiarra, which is a way of doing some makeshifts in technology. Some people here at IPS started to do research on the usage of technology by the poor. So we did research in the music scenes emerging from the Brazilian shanty towns and favelas. So we talked about what was called the techno brega scene and others. We started to understand how were the ideas about intellectual property either for poor communities but also indigenous communities. We organized a mission to talk with a lot of Brazilian indigenous groups about their perception about what is intellectual property, and not to teach them what is the European view of intellectual property, but to learn from them about how they would see their culture appropriated. And we found the most complex, amazing, and completely transformative, and with an amazing potential about how you actually are able to reframe all those concepts by simply delving into Brazil, digging into Brazil, and seeing like that. And this thinking in Brazil, it resonated for many years. But starting in the 2010s, it started basically to collapse. And I think like just everyone else, we were defeated. There was a defeat of these possibilities of keeping our perspectives on technology open. And we faced homogeneity, the people's habits of what they do online became very narrow. So they would be captured by a number of platforms that evolved from Facebook to Wikipedia to a few others, and basically, so there was this feeling that instead of being open to all the possibilities, we were basically now simply doing the same thing over and over again. So that's why I think your visit to Brazil resonates so strongly, and that's why we had like 200 people overcrowding a room yesterday at the Federal University of Rio, because I think like people did not lose in their internal perspective these possibilities. But the question I would have for you for comment is basically, what is your suggestion for disenchanted Brazilians that were for some time able to think big and now are basically trapped into thinking small again? How do we think big again?
Well, I think that I don't know if I can really give some good advice on that, but I think for my own work, which I have been trying to do in the past decades, is that maybe I can say that in order to approach the question of techno-diversity or multiple cosmotechnics, there are two major perspectives we should look into. One is what I call the question of episteme, which I define episteme in terms of the sensible condition under which knowledge is produced. So the way we produce knowledge is always conditioned by certain sensibility. So for example, analogism was a knowledge produced by certain sensibility. If we think that A is analogical to B, then this is the way how knowledge is produced. The same with totemism, the same with animism. So how can we rethink, or how the question of episteme in the context of Brazil, in the context of what the Castro called the Amerindian ontology? Does it tell us anything about the sensibility, meaning the sensibility of human beings with non-human beings, with the cosmos, and what does it mean to technology? In my work, I try to oppose the Chinese technology according to two major categories. One is qi, which means because it is the same pronunciation, has two meanings. One is energy, but I'm not talking about energy here, but talking about technical objects, the utensil. And the other category is Dao, which is translated as a way, but it's more complicated by that. For the Chinese, there is always this understanding that qi, which is technology, must be unified with Dao. And Dao is about the creativity of the heaven and the earth. Very complicated, but I cannot elaborate here, but briefly I can say that it involves a certain sensibility, a certain way of understanding how knowledge is produced, and also seeing the limit, the constraints, the limits of such production of knowledge. So one perspective is to look into the question of episteme. And that is why I think that the work of Eduardo de Castro is very important for here, but we need to appropriate this from the perspective of technology, not seeing that this is something against or something is isolated from technology. And that is probably what we can, we can continue to work on. The second perspective I would call the epistemology. Like, if we approach a technology, or each technology always has certain epistemological assumptions. So, for example, if you say a social network like a Facebook, you always have certain definitions. For example, what is a user, what is a friend, what is a group, what is so on and so forth. And these are the foundations. There was a structure of knowledge behind each software. And that is what I think we have to question all this if we want to develop alternatives. But where we tend to, if we, from an anti-capitalist perspective, we tend to think that if we produce a free software or open source Facebook, then we can solve the problem. But this is not the case. Even if you produce an open source Facebook, you actually repeat the same set of assumptions. Mm-hmm. You actually repeat the same social structure that is already immanent in Facebook. The other way is that we challenge these epistemological assumptions and proposing alternative social networks, for example, which is not simply a Brazilian Facebook or Chinese Facebook. So I think this is what we can think from, firstly, from the perspective of episteme, or I say from the perspective of culture. The second is ways to think from the perspective of epistemology, to challenge the assumptions that are already embedded in these technologies. This could be also, like, for example, it doesn't have to be digital. We can also think of some larger scale infrastructures. So very brief, but this will be two main perspectives that I'm trying to explore myself as well.
Mm-hmm. This is amazing. I'm going to give the floor, but one quick comment is, I think science fiction plays such an important role for the society we live today. So we have quite a few fans of Liu Cixin in this room, for instance. But maybe what we need also is epistemological fiction, in which we can basically release the boundaries of our imagination, not only to rethink science that doesn't exist in the moment, but epistemologies that we are not trained, or even we do not even dare to think about.
Right.
So I would love to see not only science fiction, but epistemological fiction being written as a sort of an exercise of how do we reorganize the existence.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very important because the way certain science or the way we see science fiction today is, or science fictions are always read as kind of futurism. Whether it is utopian or dystopian and so on, and the possibilities of how advanced we can have with technology. But I think that it could be even more enlightening if we can have what you said, like epistemological fictions. They kind of try to think alternative technology from a very different epistemologies. So I, for example, yesterday, and in this trip in Brazil in general, I have been giving an example of Chinese medicine, which is based on a completely different epistemology than Western medicine. But what does it really mean by this? For me, it is not to argue that Chinese epistemology is more advanced or Western epistemology is more advanced. But we must open up. We must open up the differences. I'm not anti-science, I'm not anti-technology. No, this is not what I want to say. No, we must see it. We must not stay on this stage to say which one is more advanced or which one is better, but to see the diversities.
And the science fiction aims at changing the world of objects and the world of science, and I think an epistemological fiction aims and could change the world of ideas, the idea of existence of relations and concepts and so on.
Talking about this, I'm working in a graphic animation series called, it's an adaptation of Jorge Luis Borges' short history. That is called The Writing of the God. And then while working, we are doing like a 12 minutes episode of a television program. And when you talk about epistemological fiction, I'm wondering that we can put the concepts of recursivity and contingency. I will try to put in this screenwriting. I'm getting crazy with this. It will be fantastic.
Yeah, that sounds like very exciting to me too. Yes. Anna.
So earlier you were saying that if we had different concepts of nature, maybe we could have different concepts of technology either. Could you give some examples?
Well, yeah, I mean that so that's what I all this book about, that I try to use China as example, to show that like the way that technology is framed in European philosophy didn't exist in China. There was another way of looking at technology in China. So there's a diversity of technological thought. But as I said, the technology has never been a key question for philosophy, not until the 20th century, because there is, let's say, early 18th century when industrialization started, and then the problem of ecology or pollution and so on, then people start to reflect on technology. Before the industrial technology, technology was not really a key question for philosophy. And it was the same case in China. But still, it is possible to trace or to reconstruct a technological thought in China, a history of technological thought in China. That was what I tried to do. For example, in this book, and for example, if we let me give an example. If we say that our understanding of technology in the 20th century, and there was a major article, text by Martin Heidegger, the German philosopher, conference that he gave in 1949, the question concerning technology, where Heidegger said that in order to understand technology, we need first of all to understand the essence of technology, which is not about using, which is not about usage, which is not about anthropological understanding. You want to identify the essence of technology. And in this text, he gives two essences of technology. One is the Greek one, the Greek concept of techne. The other, whose essence is poiesis. And there's also the modern technology, which essence is enframing, that everything is understood as resources to be exploited. This is a brilliant understanding of technology, and this is widely accepted in Europe, outside of Europe. But there is a conceptual problem here, is that even if we accept this understanding of technology, how can we articulate, for example, Amazonian technology? Was Amazonian technology, can we understand it in terms like how the Greeks understand it? The Greeks has a god in the Olympian mountain. They have different cosmology from here in the Amazonian cosmology. So there is a difficulty to reduce Chinese cosmogonics, Amazonian cosmogonics, to the Greek notion of technology. So there is actually a diversity that we still have to dig into it, that we didn't do in the past century. So maybe by going back, this can give us an opening to look at technology. So that's what I said. I insist to say that, if there have been different concepts of nature, and maybe there have been different concepts of technology, but how are we going to articulate them? This is the key question. How can we understand its history? How can we systematically understand this thinking?
Now that I hear you, I'm starting to think that if we try to articulate these different thoughts, how are we, as a big society, as the whole world, going to articulate with each other? I understand we are diverging from this idea that we have to find a single solution for everything, and that each place, because of its cosmology, has its own little treasures and its own, particularities, etc. But let's say if we in Brazil come to find a solution for a certain issue, how do we make this become some kind of a protocol? How do we articulate this in a globalized world?
Well, I think this is, let's say, for example, in January this year, that the UN Secretary, Antonio Guterres, gave a speech in the World Economic Forum. He opened by saying that what we need is a universal or common solution for the catastrophe that we have today. He said that what we have now is only fragmented solutions, which is the beginning of catastrophe. But I disagree with him. I disagree with him because I don't believe there is going to be a universal global solution for the problem that we have. Let's give an example about the use of pesticide. Pesticides, if you understand it, as a chemical that has certain effect on organism, it's universal. You can put it everywhere, in Brazil, in China, in USA. But the way you use it, when you use it, it actually produces different consequences in different areas, in different localities. In Brazil, maybe it caused catastrophe. Maybe in China there was no problem, because there was a locality. And that means that there was certain idea about a universal solution. It's like the use of pesticide. It doesn't hold. It cannot sustain. So in this case, we must go back to the question of locality, and to think that how. It's what I try to frame as technodiversity. This technodiversity has a specificity of its environment. Like you cannot do the same thing maybe in the USA as you do it in the Amazon, for example. There's environmental constraints, there's cultural constraints, there's also cosmological constraints. we can simply say that whereas it is based on a particular understanding which is claimed to be scientific, and then we can use it as a universal solution. No, I don't think this will be the case. No, I think what we have to escape is a certain, is a return to certain identity politics, by saying that this is Brazilian, we have a Brazilian exceptionalism, or we have a Sino or Chinese exceptionalism. I think this will be a problem, and that is exactly what is happening with the rise of the right-wing government. A certain locality. That's why, like for example, in France, the Front National of Marine Le Pen has been talking about locality. But the locality, what she is talking about, is very different from what we are talking about locality here, right? Because that is identity politics. But I think the key point, I think the advantage when we talk about technodiversity is precisely that technology is not something that we can limit, that we can refine and to set a boundary. Because technology is very susceptible to mutation. Now, so the meaning, if our focus, if we develop a technodiversity, it doesn't mean that we are going to remain in the very static understanding of technology, or some very isolated or exclusive technology. No, that is not going to be the case, because technology will evolve and technology will mutate. And that is, in the sense, maybe we can say like the what is the term, the anthropophagy that you are talking about here. No? So because that is the specificity of technology, that yes. Because it can eat others' body and to mutate and so on. So I think that could be a way for us to avoid the problem of politics. And that is why technology is something we cannot avoid. We cannot say that let's go back to nature, let's go back to develop a new politics. No, we have to transform these technologies. Mm-hmm. And there is an urgency to do so.
Mm-hmm. And we've got a question from the web, people that are watching us through technology. Yeah. And the question is from Isabel Goulart. Yeah. And Isabel is asking you, what are the alternatives to think about education and also fundamental education? How do we overcome this homogeneity? How we educate?
Well, I think this is a key question of education. It's a very important and fundamental question of education. That for me, I grew up in Hong Kong, and the education I had is Western science, Western knowledge, and to be honest, I didn't know the diversity. If I only stay in the system. And in the education system that I have when I was a child, So we have to really rethink about the question of disciplines and what are the necessary knowledge to be taught at the for example, even in primary schools and secondary schools. That how to keep our children have a certain kind of openness to, and also curiosity. Like they are able to open themselves to different epistemologies instead of seeing debating, you are scientific, you are not scientific. No, this is no way to go. And also, I think that in our university education system, I have the impression, and I also hope that I will be proved to be wrong one day. Because I think that our education system at the universities is not capable to respond to the problem that we have today. It's not able to respond to the technological development as well. So partially because of the division of disciplines that we have. And the key, I think, for me, I think it is not about creating more interdisciplinary studies. Maybe we have to reform the whole system and to create new disciplines. Not simply bringing people together from different backgrounds together, because then we tend to bridge these gaps. When we try to bridge these gaps, at the same time we also maintain these gaps. So I think that is a huge question, a big question that we have to think. What could be maybe the alternative? How the universities can respond to this situation that we have, and how can we also build alternative institutes like what you are doing here, because you also produce education programs to the public, for example, and at the same time you are independent from the university system. So I think a key question that we have to really formulate and to experiment.
I have another question from the people that are watching us.
Yeah.
Now it's from Diogo Duarte, and Diogo is asking you, what are the options we have to reduce the gap between the discussions about technology and the technological evolution itself? It seems that we are always pursuing some tale that keeps getting more and more distant. Based on this, what are your thoughts about media and information literacy?
Yeah.
Are there any directions or best practices in China or another place that you've been?
No, I think that, as I said before, that the division of discipline that we have today, or the education system that we have today, is not capable to respond to the technological situation. Now, let's for example, if we say that there is, for example, after the launch of Airbnb, after the launch of couch surfing, Facebook, there has been so many studies about how people use Facebook, how people use Airbnb, how people use couch surfing, what are the sociality of couch surfing, what is the sociality of Airbnb. For example, in sociology, in anthropology, so on and so forth. That is a way that people in the humanities want to catch up with technology, want to understand technology, but very often we avoid or we ignore or forget that actually we need to transform these technologies, not simply studying the consequence of these technologies. So that's why we talk about epistemological fictions and the diversities, techno-diversities. It would be probably if we continue to study, on Silicon Valley launch a technology and then we want to study its effect. Humans, social sciences, human sciences, if we continue doing this, we are really behind. We are really not, as what this question says, that we tend to discuss technology and its aftermath without being able to engage in the technological development. That is sort of the problem we have. So, and that is why I said that we need to think of new institutions, we have to think of new disciplines. We should know it's not about studying the consequences of technologies, but rather to open up the question of technology, to suggest alternatives, to develop alternatives.
In one of your interviews, you talk about alternatives to social networks that are not based on individuals but in groups.
Yeah.
I did not have the opportunity to dive further into that, so I'm gonna enjoy this opportunity and ask you to talk to us a little bit more about how you structure this kind of social network.
Well, I mean, there was a project that I did quite a few years ago when I was still in Paris, and my idea is that, like as a response to what I just said before, instead of studying the effect of Facebook, I wanted to provide a critique of Facebook from the perspective of epistemology, because we all know the problems Facebook has caused. Who was one of the investors of Facebook has said yesterday that since the beginning Facebook is a tool for addiction, like make people addicted to it. There's a huge problem of Facebook, socially. It's a social phenomenon. But I wanted to trace what I wanted to do is to see what are the basic assumptions of social networks like Facebook. And basically, if you trace the history of social network, and this is why we need a new discipline for studying technology. If you trace the history of social networks, we can actually trace back to, for example, in the 1930s, the work of a sociology psychologist called Jacob Moreno, an Austrian psychologist, and he proposed a discipline called sociometry. In this sociometry, he believed that actually we can map the relation between each individuals, and after we map these relations, we can actually manipulate them in order to resolve problems. And this is the model of social network that we have today. And these assumptions are each individual is a social atom. You are an atom, I'm an atom, you are an atom. And start from the society is an aggregation, a collection of atoms. And each atom, the relation between the social relation could be understood as a line joining two atoms. That's the social network model, the graph that we have today. But then we can, if I practice what I said before about challenging this epistemology, we can say that is it legitimate to say that the individual is an atom? In the literature of anthropology, of sociology, actually we have a lot of ground to reject that atomism is the beginning of society. No? Because society starts with groups. Society starts with collectives. It's not about atoms. So how can we reframe? How can we, if this is the case, what kind of social network could be developed if it is not individual? Then how can we make it this collective? Not starting with atoms. One of the solutions that I provide is that let's make group the basic unit of social network, but not individual. So one solution that we can think about technically is that I can inscribe as a member of a social network, but I will not be able to use any substantial function unless I join a group. So I can be a user of ITS, but I will not able to participate if I don't choose a project, because you have different projects here. So you cannot really engage unless you become member of a group. So in this case, the group becomes the basic unit, but not the individual. So this is an alternative way to think of social network, which is not say Facebook anymore. So this is also example I wanted to say. I want to suggest that there is a methodology that we can employ to study technologies, at the same time to engage with it by providing alternative epistemologies.
Thank
Very
you.
good. I think we are approaching the end of our talk. This has been really amazing. We have a lot of participation in the live streaming.
Yeah.
And we are going to make this live streaming available so that people can share. More than that, once again, this is one of the books that Professor Yuk Hoi has written. So it's a question concerning technology in China, an essay in cosmotechnics, and a book by Professor Hoi will be published in Brazil in Portuguese by Editora Ubu, and it's going to be a compilation of articles and interviews, which I think it will be a great interview for people to actually look for your other books.
Thank you very much. You announced it, so Uber have to be committed now.
I know. I'm already speaking on their behalf because I know how fast they move, and here we do things Shenzhen speed, you know? So we are really fast. We like to do things. We're going to do that fast. So it's really an honor to have you at ITS. And as you said, we try to be as close as possible from the ideas that you suggest, and becoming an institute and being an institute that thinks technology and society from a very broad perspective, building our own agendas. We are optimists, and I think your work makes us even more optimists.
Oh, thank you very much.
So,
my honor.
Thank you so much. Obrigado para todo mundo que assistiu. Obrigado, gente, e se é senin, e muito obrigado a todos. Obrigado.